The morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns across the worn hardwood floor of my grandmother's kitchen. I stood by the sink, gently squeezing the rubber bulb of the blood pressure monitor wrapped around her thin arm, watching the numbers rise. My name is Lauren Bennett. I live in Savannah, Georgia, in the same creaky old house where I was raised, now caring for the woman who once raised me. Your hands are shaking again, Grandma, I murmured, trying to keep my tone light. Eleanor Bennett, 80 years old and proud as ever, gave me a scowl that could slice through steel. Because that thing is lying again. No way my pressure is that good. You and that machine are both wrong. I chuckled. 130/80. That's astronaut material. She huffed, clearly disappointed that the numbers didn't confirm her current act of being at death's door. My grandma had a flair for drama and a deep-seated belief that if she didn't make noise, the world would forget she was here. She shifted upright in her chair, adjusting her scarf like a queen preparing for court. Back in my day, we didn't need gadgets to know how we felt. I can tell my heart's racing. Must be over 200. Then I guess you'd better sit still, or I'll be calling 911, I teased, placing a plate of toast and scrambled eggs in front of her. At that, her face softened a little. You wouldn't dare. You're right. I wouldn't give the ER nurses the satisfaction. They still haven't forgiven you for that time. You faked chest pains just to get your wedding ring cut off. Her shoulders shook with laughter she pretended not to have. That ring was stuck and I wanted it off. Nothing fake about that. We fell into a familiar rhythm. Her nitpicking, my deflection. It was how we'd always been, especially since I'd moved back in after Mama passed and Daddy moved to Alabama for work. I worked mornings at St. Juniper's clinic, afternoons part-time at a small urgent care downtown, and evenings at home with Grandma. She insisted I was doing too much, but she loved the attention. You know what I was thinking about last night, she said suddenly, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. How much I want to live long enough to hold a great-grandbaby. I glanced at the clock. 7:20. I still had time. You've told me that every Sunday since I turned 25, Grandma. And I'll keep saying it till you make it happen. You know what they say, if a woman lives to rock a great-grandchild, her sins get wiped clean, like a Southern baptism with diapers. That's not how redemption works, I said, but I was smiling. She leaned in, narrowing her eyes. So, anyone new I should know about? I hesitated for just a moment too long. Grandma caught it. I knew it. Don't you dare say it's nothing. Who is he? I sighed, still unsure whether it was too soon to say anything. But something about the glint in her eyes, the same glint she had when she caught me sneaking cookies at age 7, made me cave. His name's Mark. Mark Bennett. She blinked. Same last name. I shrugged. Total coincidence. We're not related, I promise. And we've been seeing each other for almost a year now. Eleanor's face bloomed into something between smug and thrilled. You tell your mama? You're the first person I've told. That seemed to please her even more than the breakfast. She patted my hand, squeezing it with surprising strength. Lauren, if this Mark boy's as good as he sounds, you'd better keep him. Don't let life pass you by. I nodded, tucking the moment away in a quiet corner of my chest. In that warm Savannah kitchen, with the kettle whistling and the trees outside shaking off the last of spring, I let myself imagine it, the life she wanted for me. A family, a future, a kind of peace I hadn't dared hope for in years. Little did I know that peace was already hanging by a thread. At work, I often joked that the front office of Coastal Care Billing smelled like desperation and burnt coffee. Maybe it was the old carpet, or maybe it was just the way people's dreams shriveled up under fluorescent lights and Excel spreadsheets. I worked 3 days a week there, just enough to keep my foot in the door and my insurance active, reporting to a woman I used to call my best friend, Savannah Reed. We'd known each other since high school. She was the girl with the loud laugh, shiny lip gloss, and a talent for talking her way out of gym class. I was quieter, more the planner, the keeper of details. Somehow opposites stuck. We shared lockers, clothes, even boy crushes once or twice, until life pulled us in different directions. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe I just didn't see it happening. "Why are you glowing like someone proposed?" she asked, plopping into the chair beside me and nudging my elbow with hers. I gave her a look. "You've been watching too many rom-coms again." "No, seriously. You've got that someone walked me to my car and settled the right things face." I sighed. "If you must know, Mark and I had dinner last night. It was nice." Savannah's mouth twisted into a smirk. "Nice? That's it. Come on, I know your nice means you didn't sleep, you just floated on a cloud of man cologne and promises." I rolled my eyes, but she wasn't wrong. Savannah had met Mark once, very briefly. It was last fall, during our office's poorly planned Friendsgiving. He dropped off a pumpkin pie, kissed my cheek, and vanished like a gentleman. She watched the whole thing with the same look she gave clearance sales at designer stores. Intense, predatory, slightly amused. "Still driving that Navy pickup?" she asked, almost too casually. "Yeah. Must be nice. Guy's got stable hands and a decent job. Looks like he could lift a sofa without complaining. He's not a piece of furniture, Savannah." She leaned back in her chair, twisting the edge of her gold bracelet. "I'm just saying, some of us are out here collecting emotional damages and weak backbones. Meanwhile, you've got a man who actually answers your texts and opens doors. That's rare." There it was, the edge, the thing she never said out loud but always implied, that I had something she believed belonged to her. I wanted to shake it off, to remind myself this was just Savannah being Savannah, but something in her tone stayed with me all day. Later, as we typed in silence, she spoke again, her voice low. "You know, it's weird." "What is?" "You and Mark. I never thought you'd go for someone like him." "Someone like?" She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "I don't know. Clean cut. Boring, maybe. Predictable." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I realized something in that moment, something sharp and uncomfortable. My best friend, the girl I had laughed with in locker rooms and cried with over ice cream pints, had stopped rooting for me a long time ago. Somewhere between our teenage daydreams and adult disappointments, the thread that held us together had thinned, and I wasn't sure it could hold much longer. And still I smiled, pretending not to notice. Because letting go of someone you've known half your life doesn't happen in one day. It happens in pauses, in looks, in offhand comments disguised as jokes. And I wasn't quite ready to face it yet. It was a Friday night when Mark suggested we catch a movie downtown. There was this little art house theater just off Whitaker Street that still ran foreign classics on real film. Not digital, not remastered, just pure, grainy reels with subtitles and scratchy audio. Mark knew I loved those. "Something Italian," he said. "You'll pretend to read the subtitles, and I'll pretend I understand the plot." I laughed. "Deal." I wore my favorite burgundy dress, the one Grandma Eleanor always said made me look like a Southern debutante with a secret. We were supposed to meet at 7, grab popcorn, and maybe some of those awful licorice bites I only ate out of nostalgia. But at 6:58, my phone buzzed. "Savannah, guess what? I'm downtown too. Just got out of happy hour. Want to meet up?" I hesitated, thumb hovering. Then, against every instinct in my chest, I replied, "Me. We're headed to the film house. Italian drama." "Savannah, oh, I'll come by. I've been dying to see something tragic and artsy." I stared at the screen. I didn't reply, but 2 minutes later she texted again. "Almost there. Don't ditch me." By the time I turned the corner, Mark was already waiting, standing near the glowing marquee, hands in pockets, looking every bit like someone from an old romance film. And there she was, already by his side. "Lauren!" she called out cheerfully, like this was always the plan. Mark smiled when he saw me, but his expression flickered. Just slightly. Not annoyance. Not anger. Just confusion. "Didn't expect we had company tonight," he said, softly when I reached him. "Yeah. Last minute," I murmured, then turned to Savannah. "You sure you want to sit through subtitles?" She grinned. "I can handle foreign men mumbling about lost love and cigarettes." Inside, the seats were creaky. The theater smelled of popcorn butter and dusty velvet. We sat in a row, Savannah in the middle, like it was her date night too. Throughout the film, she whispered commentary. Loudly, she gasped at plot twists, laughed at scenes that weren't funny, and at one point, she even kicked off her heels and propped her feet on the seat in front of her. Mark didn't say a word, but I saw the way his jaw tightened. I saw how he stopped reaching for my hand halfway through the second act. When the credits rolled and the old projector rattled to a stop, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. Wasn't that deliciously depressing? Savannah sighed. "So, when are we grabbing drinks? I know this cute rooftop bar on Bay." Mark shook his head. "Actually, we were thinking of calling it a night." "Oh," she said, blinking innocently. "You two always so early?" Mark turned to me. "Can we walk a little?" I nodded. Savannah waved dramatically. "Fine, lovebirds. Don't be surprised if I crash your wedding one day." We smiled politely. I didn't look back. Outside, the Savannah night was warm and thick with humidity. Spanish moss swayed over the sidewalks like ghostly curtains. The only sound for a block was the clicking of my heels. When we reached one of the park benches under the old oaks, Mark stopped. "You okay?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, just wasn't the night I pictured." "Me neither." A beat. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. "I was going to do this over dinner, maybe with candles or something less weirdly chaotic, but screw it. It's us." He pulled out a small navy box and opened it. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, was a ring that sparkled like the Savannah River at sunset. "Lauren Bennett," he said, eyes not leaving mine, "will you marry me?" I couldn't speak for a moment. Then I laughed, half from nerves, half from pure joy. "Yes," I whispered. "God, yes." He slid the ring onto my finger. Somewhere distant thunder rolled. And maybe it was just me, but it sounded almost like a warning. They say the first year of marriage is the hardest. But for us, it felt like drifting through honey. Everything was golden, slow, and impossibly sweet. Our tiny house off Magnolia Street may have creaked with age, but it felt like home, ours. I filled it with candles and soft blankets. Mark stocked the pantry like we were preparing for winter in the mountains. We didn't have a honeymoon. We didn't need one. Every morning felt like waking up to something sacred. Every night ended with a laugh muffled into the pillow. I still worked part-time, mostly at the urgent care center. Mark was doing well, too. He had started supervising maintenance crews for a property group downtown, which meant steadier hours, better pay. He even stopped bringing home his muddy boots. Our routines felt ordinary, comforting. And then Savannah came by. She didn't call first, didn't text. Just showed up one Sunday afternoon with a bag of cookies from some overpriced bakery on Bay Street and the smell of expensive perfume trailing behind her. I was in leggings and Mark's oversized t-shirt, hair in a messy bun, no makeup. She looked like she'd stepped out of a department store ad. "Well, look at you," she said, surveying the living room with a crooked smile. "Cozy little cottage. I thought you'd moved into something fancier after snagging Mr. Tall and Silent." I laughed, but something about her tone made the air feel less warm. Mark offered her tea, ever the gentleman. She declined, wrinkling her nose like the thought of store-brand Earl Grey might burn her tongue. For 10 minutes, she talked nonstop about her promotion, her new car, her brief entanglement with some local real estate guy. She barely looked at me, but every time Mark spoke, she turned her head sharply, eyes gleaming like she was tuning in to something only she could hear. When she finally left, I stood at the window, watching her strut down the walk in her heeled boots. "You okay?" Mark asked, sliding an arm around my waist. "Yeah," I said, but I wasn't sure. That was the beginning of it. Not the beginning of the end. No, not yet. Just the shift. The first ripple in still water. That visit happened just weeks before I found out I was pregnant, though I didn't know it at the time. Over the next few months, I saw Savannah less and less. Part of it was work. We were both busier. Part of it was me. I didn't reach out. Something unspoken had passed between us, and I didn't know how to undo it. Then came the surprise. The 2 pink lines. I stared at the test for a full 5 minutes before letting myself believe it. Mark held me in the kitchen, both of us barefoot and stunned. He cried. I didn't. I just held on to him and whispered, "We're going to be okay." And we were, at least for a while. Savannah found out at work. She brought me decaf from the cafe downstairs and forced a smile. "A little baby Bennett," she said, voice tight. "How traditional." I thanked her. She patted my hand like she was blessing me before a long, difficult journey she had no intention of taking herself. Weeks passed. My belly grew. Mark built a cradle from scratch, sanded it every weekend until it gleamed. Grandma Eleanor started knitting booties with tiny, mismatched buttons. Savannah never asked the due date. She never came by again, but her silence was louder than any word. The office didn't look any different the day Savannah got promoted, but everything shifted. Her name appeared in bold on the glass door. Savannah Reed, head of accounting. A new plaque, a new pair of heels, and a very new tone of voice. I wasn't surprised she got the role. Savannah had always known how to talk to the right people, laugh at the right jokes, sip the right wine at the right fundraiser. She was a natural fit for middle management. The only thing unnatural was how fast she stopped being Savannah the friend and became Ms. Reed the boss. It started small. "Could you proof that again, Lauren? Your numbers look a little rushed." Or maybe just take the calls today. "You seem a bit tired lately." I was tired. I was in my 3rd trimester. My ankles swelled like balloons, my back ached before lunch, and the baby had a habit of kicking right as I tried to balance invoices. But I kept showing up, because that's what you do when you're building a life. One afternoon, my fingers trembling more than usual, I knocked on her office door. Her new glass office with fake orchids and inspirational quotes framed in gold. She didn't look up. "Savannah," I said softly, "do you have a minute?" "Not really, but if it's important." She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. I sat, trying not to wince. The baby had shifted in a way that made breathing a task. I clutched the folded piece of paper in my hand, my formal request for early leave. I spoke to HR. They said if I got supervisor approval, I could begin maternity leave 2 weeks early. "Just to what?" she cut in. I blinked. "To rest. My doctor said the swelling's gotten worse. They're a little concerned about my—" Savannah let out a breathy laugh, the kind that was neither kind nor amused. "Lauren, we're closing out year-end reports. Everyone's stressed. I've got 3 interns crying in the hallway. You think now's the time to vanish." "I'm not vanishing," I said carefully. "Just asking for a bit of flexibility. It's only, you'll leave when the system says you're allowed to. That's the policy. I don't make the rules." But she did. Everyone knew she did now. I stood, legs shaking more from anger than fatigue. I'd known this woman for nearly 2 decades, shared secrets, heartbreaks, and hairbrushes, and now she was looking at me like I was a stranger taking up too much space. I reached the door when she said it. "Oh, and Lauren." I turned. Her eyes glinted, smug, cold, almost gleeful. "All that happy glow you walk around with? Don't flaunt it so much. Some of us have to work twice as hard without a husband baking us casseroles and building us cribs." I didn't reply. I just left. I made it down the hall, into the stairwell, and crumpled. Not from her words, but from what came after. That night I started spotting. The pain was sharp, sudden. Mark rushed me to the hospital. They kept me overnight. Said I needed bed rest. Said my body was crying uncle. "You're pushing too hard," the doctor said, her tone gentle but firm. "Rest, or risk more than stress." So I rested, and in that quiet I thought about friendship, how it can bloom like jasmine in spring, or rot like forgotten fruit in the heat. And sometimes the person you trusted most with your heart becomes the one swinging the blade. Grace came into the world on a Monday morning, just after a thunderstorm rolled over Savannah. I remember lying there in that sterile white room, clutching the bedsheet like a rope, as my body split open to let life in. And it wasn't just pain, it was terror, hope, awe, 1,000 things at once. She didn't cry at first. For the briefest, longest moment of my life, silence. Then, like a ribbon tearing, her voice, weak, high rasping, but there, alive. I sobbed. Mark held my hand so tight I thought my fingers would bruise. We looked at each other with eyes wide, like children who had just stumbled into something too big for them to understand. And maybe we had. They placed her in a glass bassinet, tubes already snaking from her tiny nose. She looked fragile, more spirit than skin. "Just a precaution," the nurse said. But I knew, the way the doctor hovered, the way they kept whispering in the corner of the room. Something was wrong. 2 hours later, they confirmed it. "She has a congenital heart defect," the doctor said gently, her hands folded like she was delivering a eulogy. "A severe one. We'll need to keep her in NICU. She can't breathe on her own yet." The words cracked through me like frost on glass. Mark stood frozen. "What does that mean? Is she dying?" "No," the doctor said quickly. "Not if we act fast. She'll need oxygen support. And very likely, surgery. Possibly more than one. The first will happen in a couple of weeks, if she's strong enough." Surgery. On a baby that weighed 6 pounds and barely had a heartbeat loud enough to find. I didn't cry. Not then. I went still, numb, like my body had decided not to feel anything else until it was safe to come back. They didn't tell Grace. Of course not. But somehow she knew. She fought like she had something to prove. Her eyes, when they opened, were dark and ancient, like she'd already lived 1,000 lives. Mark came every day to the hospital. At first, he brought flowers, snacks, even a small stuffed lion he said was a little fierce friend to guard her crib. But somewhere between the second surgery consult and the endless insurance calls, something shifted. He started checking his phone more, started lingering in the hallway instead of coming into the NICU. Then came the day we brought her home. We had prepped for weeks, cleared a corner of the bedroom, installed the oxygen tank, rearranged furniture so I could reach her with just one step. I'd memorized the medication schedule like a prayer. I wasn't just her mother. I was her nurse, her guardian, her around-the-clock defense system against the odds. The first few weeks were quiet, exhausting, sacred, and then the fever. It started 2 days after a neighbor's daughter came by with a handmade rattle. She hadn't been sick, not visibly, but toddlers carry storms in their skin. Grace's breathing grew shallow. Her tiny chest heaved like she was drowning on dry land. We raced back to the hospital. This time they didn't say just a precaution. This time they said serious risk of respiratory failure. Mark stood beside her crib for 10 minutes, then left to make some calls. He came back 3 hours later. By then Grace was stable. For now. We sat side by side in plastic chairs outside the NICU. He didn't speak. Neither did I. There was nothing left to say, only what would be said later. In louder ways. In crueler rooms. But that night we just listened to the beeping of machines, to the hum of survival, and to the quiet unraveling of something we once called a marriage. There's a silence that settles over a house when love starts to rot. It's not loud, not explosive. It's the silence of two people sharing the same space but breathing in different dimensions. The clink of forks against plates. The hollow thud of footsteps overhead. The way he stopped saying goodnight. Mark changed slowly. At first, it was exhaustion. "I'm just tired," he said. "I can't do the late-night feeds. I've got meetings. You're already home all day anyway." Then, frustration. "Why does she keep crying? Didn't they fix her?" Fix her. As if our daughter were some broken appliance that refused to work right. I didn't fight him. Not yet. I thought if I just held it all together, if I stayed calm, reliable, unshaken, he'd come back to himself. To us. But I was wrong. The day it cracked open, the sky was unusually bright. I remember because I had Grace bundled against my chest in the sling, her breath soft against my collarbone, and sunlight filtered through the window like gold mist. Mark came home early. He didn't take off his shoes, didn't kiss my cheek, just stood there at the threshold, jaw clenched like he was bracing for impact. "I can't do this anymore," he said. I didn't move. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew. This house, this crying, this version of our life, it's not who I am. I didn't sign up to be a full-time caretaker of a sick kid and a wife who doesn't smile anymore. I looked down at Grace. She blinked up at me, her little lips pursed like a question mark. "Are you leaving?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away, just walked to the hall closet and grabbed his overnight bag. "I've been seeing someone," he said without looking at me. "Savannah." The name hit me like a slap. "Savannah from work." He nodded. "She gets it. She sees me. She makes things feel light again." Light. That's what he wanted. Not love. Not depth. Not loyalty. Just something weightless. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked past him, into Grace's room, and closed the door. He left that night. No goodbye to his daughter. No explanation. Just the sound of his tires on the driveway gravel and the long, low silence that followed. I sat on the nursery floor with Grace in my arms, rocking gently, listening to the wind outside and the hum of the oxygen machine. That was the moment I realized something important. He wasn't coming back, and I didn't want him to. Not the man he'd become. Not the man who looked at his daughter like a burden. Not a miracle. But what I didn't know then was that he wasn't just walking away from us. He was walking into something darker, something calculated, and I wouldn't find out until much, much later that leaving us was just the beginning of his plan. The weeks after Mark left were a blur of formula stains, medical charts, and silence. But there was also something else, breath. I hadn't noticed how tight my chest had been until he was gone. The air felt cleaner, lighter. Even with the grief curled in the corners of my room like shadows, I could finally exhale. Grace kept me grounded. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine with surprising strength. Her gaze, sharp, soulful, never wavered. She was a fighter, and because of her, I had no choice but to be one too. We moved out of that suffocating house. I rented a small carriage apartment just off Jones Street, with creaky floors and ivy climbing the windows. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I found work at a local print shop that understood when I needed to take calls from the pediatric cardiologist or rush home early if Grace's oxygen levels dropped. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It was healing. Art found its way back into my life in quiet ways. A sketch here, a watercolor there. I'd paint after Grace fell asleep. Her monitors softly blinking in the background like lullabies. My hands remembered more than I expected. The curves, the color, the language of emotion rendered on canvas. And then one night, Cassidy came over with a bottle of cheap wine and a look in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. "There's a community exhibit next month at the River Street Collective," she said, plopping down on my paint-stained couch. "Submit something. You need this." I laughed. "I haven't shown in years." "You haven't breathed in years. Come on, show them who you are now." And so I did. I painted 3 pieces, All of them quiet, all of them strong. They weren't about heartbreak or betrayal. They were about resilience, stillness, the sacred quiet after the storm. Opening night was warm and golden, the gallery filled with string lights and soft jazz. I wore a navy wrap dress that made me feel like I still had a waistline, and I even let Cassidy do my hair. Grace stayed with Miss Moira, the retired fortune teller from down the hall, who treated her like royalty. People looked at my art, stopped, felt. It was like a part of me had been asleep, and now it was stretching its arms in the sun again. Just when I thought nothing could break the peace of that evening, I turned toward the doorway, and there he was, Mark. He looked older, sharper around the eyes. His suit was pressed, his shoes gleaming, but something in his posture sagged. My heart didn't skip. It didn't shatter. It just waited. "What are you doing here?" I asked, voice cool as the gallery's tile floor. "I saw your name on the exhibit flyer. I had to see it for myself." I crossed my arms. "You could have sent an email." He looked down. "I've made mistakes, Lauren. That's one way to put it." He stepped closer. "Savannah and she left. Months ago. Said she wasn't cut out for real life. And I couldn't stop thinking about you. About Grace. I want to be part of her life." The audacity of it. He hadn't called. Hadn't sent a birthday card. Not even a text when Grace had her 3rd surgery. And now he wanted in. After all the heavy lifting had been done, I stared at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not out of kindness. Out of clarity. "You don't even know what her favorite color is," I said softly. "And I think that tells me everything I need to know." He flinched, and I turned away. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Men like Mark didn't walk away. Not without trying one last time to reclaim what they'd thrown away. And he hadn't shown his hand yet. I didn't hear from Mark for weeks after the gallery. Part of me hoped that confrontation had been enough, that the silence that followed meant he'd crawled back into whatever corner of the world could stomach his excuses. But deep down, I knew better. People like Mark don't come back for closure. They come back for control. It started with a letter. Not from him. From a law firm. Something about shared custody and the best interest of the child. The words were dressed up in politeness, but the threat underneath was sharp and unmistakable. I brought it straight to my lawyer, a steady woman named Judith who wore combat boots under her pencil skirts and had no tolerance for manipulation. "He doesn't have a leg to stand on," she said. "He abandoned his daughter. No judge in Chatham County's going to side with that." Still, the stress settled into my bones like damp air. Grace was old enough now to pick up on energy, and she started having nightmares again. I hated that his shadow could still touch her, even from afar. Then came the press release. Prominent architect returns to Savannah with vision for family and community. There he was, Mark, posing in front of a render of a fancy riverside condo project, arm around a smiling real estate executive, and tucked in the article like an afterthought. Mark Bennett, a proud father reuniting with his daughter Lauren Grace, plans to establish deeper roots in the city he once called home. Proud father? He hadn't seen her in a year. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about Grace. Not really. It was about optics. His new company, he was trying to build a family man image. Use us as props to soften the edges of his ambition. I was furious. But more than that, I was done playing nice. I reached out to a friend of Cassidy's, an investigative reporter who owed her a favor. I didn't feed her dirt. I fed her facts, hospital records, missed court-ordered support payments, emails, texts, proof of abandonment. She published a piece titled, "Image Over Integrity, the Man Behind the Renderings." It didn't scream scandal, but it whispered just loud enough to ripple through the circles Mark was trying to impress. He showed up at my doorstep 2 days later, not angry, smiling. That slick, plastic smile that used to charm boardrooms and break apologies in half. "You didn't have to do that," he said. I opened the door just wide enough for him to see my eyes. "Oh, but I did. Because you don't get to rewrite the story anymore." His jaw tensed. This could have been good for Grace. "No," I said, voice steady. "This would have been good for you. She's not a prop. She's not your redemption arc. She's a human being. And you don't even know what color her bedroom walls are." He didn't speak. "Let me make this simple," I continued. "You stay away. You stop using her name in interviews. You drop this charade. Or I'll go back to the press with everything." For a moment, I saw the mask slip. The real Mark, raw and cornered. He didn't lash out. He didn't threaten. He simply turned and walked away. That was the last time I saw him. There were no courtroom battles. No tearful reunions. Just a quiet ending to a story that should have never been his to control in the first place. And for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. But more than that, I felt free. A year later, I stood on the front porch of our new home. Small, white-trimmed, with shutters the color of summer peaches. Grace was inside, napping with her favorite stuffed bear tucked under one arm, and the late afternoon sun poured through the windows like liquid honey. Everything smelled like lavender and lemonwood polish. There were no headlines, no grand pronouncements, just life soft and unfolding. The gallery had offered me a permanent spot that spring. My Resilience series had struck a chord, and suddenly I wasn't just a woman who'd survived something. I was an artist again. People came to see the work, but more than that, they came to feel it. And in those quiet moments between canvas and I felt seen too. Cassidy had stayed in my life, fiercely loyal as ever. We'd sit on my back porch with sweet tea and old Fleetwood Mac records, laughing over nothing and everything. She said the house felt like it breathed, like it was always exhaling peace. And maybe that's what healing is. Not a moment, but a space, a place you build brick by brick, word by word, painting by painting, until it holds you gently and says, "You're safe here." Grace grew stronger. Her heart surgery is behind her now. She was a whirlwind of curls and questions and giggles that bounced off the kitchen tiles. She loved to paint beside me, always in purple, always with glitter. She'd say things like, "Mama, let's draw a dragon who's kind," and I'd nod because I knew exactly what she meant. I didn't date. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But there was something tender in that choice, too. A declaration that I didn't need a love story to be whole. That sometimes the greatest romance is the one you write with your own breath, your own hands, your own life. Still, on warm Saturdays, I'd find myself wandering the stalls at the River Street flea market. I wasn't looking for anything. But one morning, I stumbled across a man selling antique cameras. His name was Daniel, and he had gentle eyes and a voice like slow jazz. We talked about lenses and light and how some moments are best captured by memory. He didn't ask for my number. I gave it to him anyway. We met for coffee the next week. And maybe, just maybe, that's how it begins again, not with a bang, but with a quiet cup of coffee on a slow morning, when you've already made peace with yourself and someone simply fits into the rhythm you've built. I don't know where the road leads next. I just know that wherever it does, I'm not afraid anymore. Because I have grace. Because I have grace. Because I finally gave it to myself. I never thought I would tell this story out loud, but it still lives in me like an old scar that sometimes burns when the weather changes. I was 7 years old the day my mother left me at the state children's home. She knelt in front of me, held my hands, and promised, "Just a couple of days, sweetie. I'll come back for you. Don't cry, okay?" I nodded because I trusted her. She was my whole world, the only family I had. And then she walked out the door and never came back. At first, I believed she had been delayed by something important. Maybe she got sick or had an accident. Maybe she was looking for a better home for us and would come to get me when everything was ready. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I ran to the window, expecting to see her smiling face. Every time the door opened, my heart leapt. But it was never her. Not that day, not the next week, not the next month. The other kids in the home told me bluntly she's not coming back. People don't bring kids here for a few days. But I refused to believe them. I waited 1 year, then 2, then 3, until I turned 18 and left the home for good. And even then, a small part of me still thought one day she might appear, apologize, and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. When I finally tracked her down because I couldn't let go without answers, I learned the truth. She had moved to another city, built a life without me, and never planned to return. She hadn't lost me by accident. She had abandoned me on purpose. That realization hit harder than anything I had experienced as a child. I was quiet, obedient, always tried to be good, so why wasn't I enough? Why didn't she want me? For a long time, that question haunted me. But instead of letting it destroy me, I turned it into fuel. If my mother didn't want me, I would build a life so full and so strong that no one could ever throw me away again. I studied harder than anyone else in school, graduated top of my class, and earned a scholarship to a university known for its design program. I had one goal: to become independent, successful, and untouchable. I rented a small government-subsidized apartment when I aged out of the children's home, and I renovated it myself. Every piece of furniture, every color on the walls, every tiny detail was mine, proof that I could create beauty out of emptiness. That apartment wasn't just shelter, it was a statement. I was no one's burden. I was enough. Yet, even in my busiest moments, I felt lonely. Friends? I had a few acquaintances, mostly from work, but I kept my walls high. There was one exception, Ethan Collins. He was the boy I had met at the children's home when I was 11, and he was 13, still raw from losing his grandmother, the only family he had. I remembered how he had stood alone in the courtyard, head down, while a group of older boys taunted him. I stepped in, trembling but fierce, and said, "Back off. Leave him alone, or I'm telling Mr. Henderson." They laughed, but scattered, because everyone knew Mr. Henderson didn't tolerate bullying. That was how Ethan and I became friends. Two abandoned kids, holding on to each other in a world that seemed eager to forget us. We stayed, close even after he left the home, and I remained behind. On weekends, he would visit me, and we'd sit on the bench under the old oak tree, sharing stories about what we'd do when we finally had our own lives. He wanted to design houses. I wanted to fill them with warmth and light. Back then, those dreams felt like the only thing keeping us alive. I didn't know then how deeply our bond would shape my life. I didn't know it would grow into something more, something that one day would feel like the family I thought I had lost forever. When I aged out of the children's home, I stepped into the world with nothing but a worn-out suitcase, a government-issued apartment key, and a stubborn determination not to become another sad statistic. That apartment was tiny, barely 400 square feet, with peeling wallpaper and an old heater that rattled like it might explode any second. But to me, it was freedom. It was proof I didn't have to wait for someone to choose me anymore. I spent weeks saving every penny from my part-time jobs to buy paint, secondhand furniture, and cheap tools. I stayed up late sanding floors, patching cracks, and repainting the walls in warm, earthy tones. When it was done, the apartment looked nothing like a place for someone who had grown up in a system. It looked like home. My home. University was my lifeline. I had earned a scholarship for interior design, something I'd fallen in love with as a teenager when I realized how spaces could influence how people feel, how they heal. I thought if I can't fix my past, maybe I can at least create spaces that make life feel better for someone else. And so I buried myself in my studies, learning about design principles, color psychology, and furniture layout, while working part-time in a design studio to pay for food and supplies. It wasn't easy. I was the quiet one in class, the one who didn't have parents dropping them off on move-in day or visiting on weekends. I watched classmates hug their moms and dads at graduation events and pretended it didn't hurt. But every time the pain surfaced, I channeled it into work. I became one of the top students in my program, known for designs that felt warm and lived in, like someone had finally come home. When I graduated, my professor recommended me for an internship at a well-known design bureau. That internship turned into a job offer, and suddenly I was working alongside seasoned designers on real projects: restaurants, boutique hotels, high-end homes. For the first time, I had a stable income, my own clients, and the respect of people who valued my talent. Outside of work, I kept my circle small. I had friendly colleagues, but no one I'd truly let in, except for Ethan. He was still there like he had been when we were kids, just in a different way. He had gone to college for architecture, and now he was working for a construction company. Sometimes we'd meet up after work, grab coffee, and talk about everything and nothing. Ethan had always been steady, calm, and thoughtful, the kind of person who didn't need to fill every silence with words. I trusted him, even when I trusted no one else. He didn't pity me, and he never made me feel like I was broken or incomplete. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I sat on my balcony and thought about how far I'd come. I had a career I loved, a home I'd built with my own hands, and enough savings to finally stop worrying about the next emergency. And yet, there was still this emptiness, a quiet voice in my head whispering, "This isn't enough. You still don't belong anywhere. You still don't have family." That night, Ethan called. "How's the Queen of Design?" he teased, his voice warm like it always was. "Exhausted," I admitted with a tired laugh. "But I'm okay. Work is good. Life is good, I guess." "You guess?" he asked gently. "Rachel, you deserve more than just okay. You deserve happy. You deserve someone who chooses you every day." His words sank into me like rain into dry soil. For so long, I had built my life around proving I didn't need anyone. But maybe I wanted to be chosen after all. At the time, I didn't know what Ethan truly felt for me. I didn't know how much our bond would shift in the months ahead, or how profoundly he would shape the life I was trying to build. I only knew that when he was around, the world felt a little less lonely, and I didn't have to keep pretending I was perfectly fine when I wasn't. The shift between friendship and something deeper didn't happen all at once. It crept in quietly, like sunlight slowly moving across a room. I began noticing the little things Ethan did, the way he always walked me to my car after late nights at work, the way he remembered how I took my coffee, or how he'd send me random pictures of buildings because he thought I'd like the design. One night, after a long work week, he invited me to dinner. "Just to celebrate," he said, smiling like he had some secret. I thought it was casual, the way we had done so many times before. I had no idea it would change everything. When I arrived at the restaurant, I froze in the doorway. Balloons floated near the ceiling, their ribbons curling down like golden vines. Flowers, soft pink roses, lined the tables. For a moment, I thought I'd walked into someone else's private event. Then I saw the sign on the table closest to the window, "Happy birthday, Rachel." I blinked, confused. "Ethan, what is all this? My birthday was 3 days ago." "I know," he said, stepping closer, his eyes warm. "But you worked that day and said you didn't want to do anything special. I thought you deserved something anyway." He led me to the center table, where a small velvet box sat among the roses. My heart started pounding. "Ethan," I whispered, "what did you do?" He smiled, but his voice trembled just enough to tell me how serious he was. "Rachel, we've known each other for most of our lives. You're the strongest person I've ever met and the most selfless. You've been my family when I didn't have one. I don't know what my life would look like without you, and I don't want to find out." So he opened the box. Inside was a delicate bracelet, and attached to it a ring. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind flashed through every lonely night in the children's home. Every moment I'd told myself I didn't need anyone. Every brick I'd laid to build walls around my heart. And yet here was someone who had never left, who had stood beside me even when I pushed everyone else away. "Yes," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you." The restaurant erupted into applause, and Ethan wrapped me in his arms. It felt surreal, like stepping into one of those childhood dreams I'd never dared to say out loud. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in on other people's happiness. I was living it. The weeks after the proposal flew by in a blur of wedding plans, apartment hunting, and endless smiles. Ethan and I moved into a cozy 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, with big windows and just enough space to dream about the future. Our wedding was simple but perfect. There were no parents to give speeches, no relatives flying in from distant cities, just a handful of close friends. One of my former professors and Mr. Henderson, the children's home supervisor who had once broken up that fight all those years ago. When I walked down the aisle, I saw Ethan standing there, tears in his eyes, and for the first time in my life I thought, this is what belonging feels like. Marriage with Ethan felt natural, like we had been preparing for it our entire lives. We cooked together, laughed together, and even started talking about starting a business together, combining his architectural skills with my interior design expertise. We called it Collins and Company. Design. For the first time since I was a child, I stopped waking up with that gnawing ache in my chest. I had a partner. I had love. And I had a future that finally felt like it was mine. I didn't know then how fragile that happiness could be, or how quickly everything can change with one violent twist of fate. Married life with Ethan felt almost unreal at first, like I had stumbled into someone else's dream. We had our little apartment on the edge of the city, sunlight spilling through the big windows every morning, and the hum of life outside reminding me that I finally belonged somewhere. Waking up next to him, cooking breakfast together before heading off to work. Those simple moments were everything I'd ever wanted, everything I'd thought I might never have. Work had been going well for both of us, but one evening Ethan said something that made my heart race. Why don't we do this together? You're incredible with interiors, and I'm good with structures. Why not open our own firm? The idea terrified me. My whole life had been about stability, about never risking too much because I couldn't afford to fail. But looking at Ethan, his excitement contagious, I thought maybe this is what family does. They dream together. We took the plunge and started Collins and Company. Design, him handling architecture and structural plans, me focusing on interiors. At first, it was just the two of us, working late into the night, surviving on takeout and coffee. But slowly, clients started calling, thanks to word of mouth and Ethan's contacts from his construction work. One job became 3, 3 became 10, and before we knew it, we had to hire a small team. It wasn't easy. There were moments of stress, contracts falling through, clients changing their minds last minute, arguments about budgets and deadlines. Yet, every night, when we collapsed on the couch together, we'd laugh and say, "We survived another day." And somehow, that made it all feel worth it. The business grew, and so did our life together. We talked about buying a house one day, something with a backyard, maybe even space for a dog. And, of course, we talked about kids. That was where things got complicated. Month after month passed, and nothing happened. I tried not to think too much about it at first, telling myself, it'll happen when it happens. But soon I started worrying. I went to a doctor just to be sure, and after a few tests, she smiled and said, "There's nothing wrong. You can have children. Sometimes it just takes time." Relieved, I came home and begged Ethan to get checked too. He resisted at first, saying it wasn't necessary, but when he saw how much it meant to me, he agreed. A week later, he walked into the apartment with an envelope in his hand and a soft smile on his face. "We're both fine, Rachel. It's just not time yet." We tried to believe that, but the truth is it wore on me. I'd look at him sometimes, imagining him holding a baby, and my chest would ache with longing. Still, we didn't let it consume us. Instead, we poured ourselves into our business and into each other. Every project we completed felt like a victory, a small piece of the future we were building together. By our 3rd wedding anniversary, we had paid off our debts, bought a beautiful little home with wide doors and space to grow, and had a list of clients booking months in advance. We were proud, happy, and full of plans. Looking back now, I wish I could have frozen that moment. The joy, the love, the way I thought nothing could ever tear us apart. But life doesn't work like that. Because one night, on the way to celebrate Ethan's birthday and pick up the dress I'd ordered for the occasion, everything we had built, everything we had dreamed, came crashing down in a way I could never have imagined. The night it all changed was supposed to be perfect. Ethan had just turned 33, and I'd been planning a surprise dinner at his favorite restaurant. I had also ordered a new dress for the occasion, a deep emerald green one that hugged just enough to make me feel confident, but still elegant. After work, we planned to swing by the boutique to pick it up before heading to dinner. I remember feeling light that day, almost giddy, humming along to a song on the radio as Ethan drove. "You're in a good mood," he teased, his hand resting on mine. "Of course I am," I grinned. "My husband's birthday. I get to spoil you." He laughed, shaking his head. "Rachel, you do that every day." And then it happened. There was a flash of blinding headlights, a screech of tires, and the sickening crunch of metal folding in on itself. For a split second, it felt like time slowed, like I could hear every sound separately. The shattering glass, the deep groan of twisting steel, Ethan's voice shouting my name. Then pain. Hot, crushing, searing pain and nothing. When I woke up, the world was sterile white and humming with machines. My head pounded, and my mouth was dry, but the first thing I noticed was the stillness. I couldn't feel my legs. Panic clawed up my throat as I tried to move. Nothing. I tried again, harder this time, but it was like my body below the waist didn't belong to me anymore. A nurse appeared, rushing to my side. "Rachel, it's okay, you're safe. You were in an accident. Try to stay calm." "Where's Ethan?" I croaked, ignoring the pain in my chest. "He's fine," she assured me quickly. "Bruised and a mild concussion, but he's okay. You've had surgery on your back. The doctors will explain everything." Ethan was there not long after, sitting by my bed, holding my hand like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. He smiled through tears. "You scared me, Rachel. God, you scared me." "Ethan, my legs." "I can't feel my legs," I whispered. His smile faltered, his eyes glossing with fresh tears. "The doctors said it's too early to know the outcome. You need time to heal, to see what comes back. We'll figure it out together, okay?" But deep inside, I already knew. Something fundamental had shifted. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital rooms, physical therapy assessments, and endless, aching nights. My once strong, independent body was now something I didn't recognize. And though Ethan never left my side, feeding me, brushing my hair, holding me when I cried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost more than just my mobility. I'd lost who I was. One evening, I broke down completely. "Ethan, you don't deserve this," I said through tears. "You married someone who could stand beside you, not someone who can't even stand at all. You should leave me. Find someone else, someone whole." He cupped my face in his hands, eyes fierce. "Rachel Collins, you listen to me. I didn't marry you for your legs. I married you for your heart, for your soul, for everything you are. You are my wife, and I'm not going anywhere. Ever." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered, "This is too much. He'll get tired. He'll walk away just like she did." I swallowed that fear, trying to bury it, but it lingered like a shadow at the edge of every moment. And I had no idea how much darker that shadow would become. Recovery was supposed to be about hope, about small victories that add up over time. That's what the therapist said, what the nurses repeated like a mantra. But to me, recovery felt like watching someone else live my life while I sat still, useless and trapped inside my own body. I went through surgery after surgery, each one promising a chance to regain what I'd lost. Metal rods, endless physical therapy sessions, injections, nerve tests. My life became a string of procedures and waiting rooms. For a while, I clung to the idea that if I just worked hard enough, I could get back to where I was before the accident. But each day bled into the next, and my legs remained silent, numb like they didn't belong to me anymore. Then came the tumor. It was a small growth near my spinal cord, benign but complicated. The doctors told me it was most likely a result of scar tissue and trauma. More surgery, they said. More recovery. More pain. Something inside me broke at that moment. No more, I whispered to the surgeon, tears stinging my eyes. I'm done. No more surgeries. I can't live like this anymore. When I came home from the hospital that day, Ethan tried to reason with me. Rachel, don't give up now. You're stronger than this. We can beat this thing together. I shook my head. I don't have it in me anymore, Ethan. I'm tired of being cut open, tired of hoping for something that never comes. I just want to be home, in peace, however long I have. He nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes. And that's when things between us began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. Ethan started working late more often. At first, it made sense. We still had our design business, clients depending on us. But soon it felt like he was avoiding me. I'd hear his car pull in after midnight, or sometimes not at all. When I asked, he'd say he fell asleep at the office, too tired to drive home. I tried to believe him. I told myself he was just stressed, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, my injuries, our business, the life we'd built now teetering on shaky ground. But that little voice inside me whispered louder with each passing day. He's slipping away. He's leaving you, just like she did. And I hated myself for thinking it because he was still kind, still patient when he was home. He'd bring me flowers, make me tea, sit with me while I cried at night. But there was a distance in his eyes sometimes, like he was looking at me and seeing the life he'd lost instead of the woman he'd married. One evening, as I sat in my wheelchair by the window, watching rain streak down the glass, I realized I was crying without even noticing it. I had been here before. This feeling of waiting for someone to come back, someone who might never truly return. And I thought, maybe this is what I deserve. Maybe I was never meant to be someone's forever. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and an ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I didn't tell Ethan how deep it went, how I feared he was already halfway gone. Instead, I smiled when he left for work and told him to be careful, just like I used to do back when life was normal. But inside, I was bracing for the moment he would stop coming home altogether. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Ethan had already left for work, and I hadn't scheduled any therapy visits. I wheeled myself to the door and opened it, expecting maybe a delivery. Instead, there stood a man I had never seen before, late 50s, salt and pepper hair, eyes that looked strangely familiar. "Rachel Collins," he asked gently. "Yes, can I help you?" I answered cautiously. He took a deep breath, as if steadying himself. "My name is Dr. Thomas Green, and I'm your father." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. My father? The man I'd been told didn't exist? My mother had always insisted she raised me alone, that my father wasn't someone I needed to know about. She never even said his name. I laughed, sharp, nervous, bitter. My father? That's impossible. My mother said, "I didn't know about you," he cut in, his voice shaking slightly. "Rachel, I swear to you I didn't know. I only found out 2 months ago, when your mother reached out to me before she passed. The mention of her stopped me cold. My mother gone? After all those years of silence, all those unanswered questions, she had died without ever facing me. Thomas continued. She told me everything. She told me she left you at the children's home and that she regretted it every day. She asked me to find you, to tell you she was sorry." I stared at him, trying to process everything. "Why now? Why after all these years?" "Because I'm your father, and I didn't know I had a daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't change what she did, but I can try to be here now if you'll let me." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to slam the door and never look back. How dare he come into my life after everything? But another part of me, the part that had spent a lifetime aching for family, wanted to believe him. Finally, I asked, "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," he said simply. "Only to know you, to help if I can. I'm a physical rehabilitation doctor. I heard about your accident. I think I can help you regain some mobility if you trust me enough to let me try." I almost laughed again. Help me walk? After everything the other doctors had said? It sounded too good to be true. And yet there was something in his eyes, a mix of guilt, hope, and an odd familiarity that made my chest ache. "Why would you even care?" I whispered. "Because you're my daughter," he said, his eyes shining. "And I already wasted too much time not being there for you. Please, Rachel, let me try to make up for that in any way I can." I let him in. For the next hour, he explained his work, how he'd specialized in spinal injury rehabilitation for decades, how he believed the right combination of therapy and patience might help me regain partial use of my legs. I listened quietly, not knowing if I'd dare to hope. When he left that day, he gave me his card. "I'll be in town for as long as you need me. Call me if you're willing." After he was gone, I sat in silence, staring at the card in my hand. My father. After 30 years of believing I had no one but Ethan, there was suddenly another branch on the family tree. Someone who claimed he wanted me, not out of obligation, but because he chose to. That night, I lay awake long after Ethan came home, still hearing Thomas's words. For the first time in months, something in me stirred, a fragile, dangerous thing I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've lived most of your life without it. For weeks, I met with Dr. Green, my father, though I still stumbled over the word, working through exercises I hadn't believed were possible. His approach was different, slower, more deliberate, focused on muscles other doctors had given up on. And something miraculous began happening. I could feel tingling in my thighs, small sparks of sensation that had been absent for months. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting session, I called Ethan. He didn't answer. I assumed he was busy, so I left a message. "Hey, just finished therapy. It's working, Ethan. I think I'm really going to walk again." My voice cracked from the weight of the words. But Ethan came home late that night, looking tense, his jaw tight. He didn't ask about therapy. He barely looked at me. "What's wrong?" I asked, rolling toward him in my chair. He hesitated, then said, "Who's Thomas?" I froze. "Thomas is my father. I told you." "No, Rachel. You didn't tell me much of anything. You just said some doctor offered to help. You didn't say he was your father, a man I've never heard of, a man who suddenly shows up and takes you to private sessions every other day." My chest tightened. "Ethan, it's not like that. He didn't even know I existed until recently. He's just trying to help, really?" His voice was sharp, unfamiliar. "Because from where I'm standing, you've been spending a lot of time with some stranger, telling him things you don't tell me. I'm your husband, Rachel. Or did that change when I wasn't looking?" Anger flared in me, hot and painful. "How dare you? This is about me trying to get my life back, Ethan. About me not being a burden to you anymore." "You were never a burden," he snapped, but his eyes betrayed him. There was exhaustion there, years worth of it. I don't know what's going on anymore. You shut me out, Rachel. And now there's this man, this father who conveniently shows up when you're at your weakest. Forgive me if I'm suspicious." I couldn't breathe. After everything, after my mother, after the accident, after all those nights wondering if Ethan would leave me, this felt like betrayal wrapped in accusation. "Get out," I said softly. He blinked. "What?" "Get out," I repeated, louder this time, my hand shaking. "If you can't trust me, if you think I'd do something like that, you need to leave. Because I can't do this with you looking at me like I'm some stranger you regret marrying." He stood there for a long moment, his face torn between anger and regret. Finally, he turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind him. I sat in my chair, tears blurring my vision, my chest aching like my ribs might crack open. All the old fears came rushing back. "He's leaving, Rachel. Everyone leaves eventually. Hours passed before I heard another knock on the door. I opened it to find Thomas standing there looking concerned. Rachel? Are you okay? I broke then. I collapsed forward, sobbing into the chest of a man I'd only known for a short time but who was undeniably my blood. He thinks I'm having an affair, I choked out. Thomas stiffened, then pulled back to look at me. An affair? With me? I nodded helplessly. He sighed, shaking his head. Rachel, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have come to meet him. Explained everything from the start. The sound of the door opening cut him off. Ethan stood there, eyes wide, his face pale. He'd come back, just in time to see me leaning on Thomas, crying. Rachel! Ethan's voice cracked. What is this? And before I could explain, he strode across the room and shoved Thomas backward. Stay away from my wife. Stop! I screamed, pushing my chair forward. He's my father, Ethan. My father. The room fell silent except for my ragged breathing. Ethan froze, looking at me like he'd just been punched. Your father, he whispered. Yes, I said, tears streaming down my cheeks. The man you thought I was cheating with is my father, the one I never had, the one who's trying to help me walk again. Ethan stumbled back, horrified, his voice barely audible. Oh God, what have I done? Ethan stood there frozen, his face pale, his hands trembling as if he didn't know what to do with them. For a long moment, no one spoke. I wiped my eyes, still shaking, and whispered, You thought I would do that to you? After everything we've been through. Ethan's eyes closed, and when they opened again, they were full of regret. Rachel, I was wrong. I let my fear and frustration get the best of me. I felt you slipping away, and instead of asking why, I accused you. I'm so sorry. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how deeply his words had cut. But when I looked at his face, at the man who had stood by me through pain and despair, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Exhaustion and fear. The same fear I'd carried for months, that I wasn't enough, that I was losing everything. Thomas stepped forward gently, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You love her. I can see that. But love isn't about control or suspicion. It's about trust and showing up when it's hardest. His voice softened. I failed Rachel once, a long time ago. I'm not going to fail her again. Don't make the same mistake I did. Ethan's eyes welled up and he turned to me. Rachel, can we fix this? Can I make this right? I hesitated, then nodded slowly. Only if you listen this time. Only if you trust me. He knelt in front of me, taking my hands. I do, and I'll do better. I promise. That night, the three of us sat together, awkward at first, then slowly unraveling years of silence and misunderstanding. I told Ethan everything about Thomas, how he hadn't known about me, how he was trying to give me back more than just movement. He was trying to give me a piece of the family I'd always longed for. Ethan listened, really listened, and something shifted. From then on, he came to my therapy sessions, not just watching but helping, holding my waist as I tried to balance, encouraging me when pain made me want to quit. And for the first time since the accident, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like part of a team. Thomas kept his promise too. His methods were exhausting, sometimes even brutal, but little by little my body responded. Muscles that had been dormant for months began firing again. The first time I managed to stand for a full 30 seconds without support, Ethan clapped like a kid, tears streaming down his face. This is only the beginning, Thomas said with a proud smile. And he was right. Within months, I could take small, shaky steps with a walker. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close, but it was progress. It was proof that I could have a life beyond the wheelchair, a life where I didn't have to be defined by what I had lost. Through it all, something beautiful happened. Ethan and Thomas built their own bond. What started as tension slowly became mutual respect. They'd sit on the porch after therapy sessions, talking about architecture, about family, even about forgiveness. One evening, Ethan turned to me and said, "Your dad's pretty great." It was the first time he'd called Thomas my dad, and it made me smile through tears. There was healing happening everywhere, not just in my body, but in our hearts. And it wasn't just us. Thomas had grown close to Margaret, my part-time nurse who had been helping me since the accident. She was warm, kind, and had this quiet strength that drew people in. One day, out of nowhere, Thomas announced, "Margaret and I were getting married." We celebrated like a family should, laughing, crying, and feeling whole in a way I hadn't believed possible just months before. Looking back, I realized something important. Healing doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it isn't just about standing on your own feet. It's about letting people stand with you, about building something new out of what you thought was broken forever. 1 year later, I stood at the edge of a small garden, filled with white chairs and soft music drifting on the breeze. It was my father's wedding day. Thomas stood near the altar, looking nervous in a perfectly tailored suit, while Margaret adjusted her bouquet with tears already forming in her eyes. I tightened my grip on the walker, my heart pounding. Not because of nerves, but because today was the day I would take my first steps in public since the accident. I could have stayed in my wheelchair and no one would have judged me. But this wasn't just about walking. It was about showing myself that I had moved beyond fear, beyond shame, beyond everything that had once held me down. Ethan stood beside me, his hand warm on mine. "Ready," he whispered. I nodded. My legs trembled, but I lifted one foot, then the other. The music swelled, and people gasped softly as I took step after step down the aisle. They weren't perfect steps, shaky, slow, deliberate, but they were mine. By the time I reached the altar, Thomas's eyes were wet. He hugged me tightly, whispering, "You made it, Rachel. You really made it." The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. There were no grand speeches about second chances or redemption, but it was in every detail. The way Thomas looked at Margaret, the way Ethan held my hand, the way my own heart felt steady and whole for the first time in years. After the vows were exchanged and applause filled the garden, Ethan leaned close to my ear. "Do you realize what you just did?" he asked. I laughed, tears spilling over. Walked down an aisle for someone else's wedding. "You walked into your future," he whispered. And he was right. That night, as we sat under a canopy of string lights, surrounded by family we never thought we'd have, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not for the pain I'd endured, not for the abandonment of my childhood, not even for the accident, but for what had come after, for the people who showed up and stayed, for a father who refused to waste the second chance he'd been given, for a husband who learned to fight alongside me instead of against me. I thought back to the girl I used to be, the one waiting by the window of a children's home for a mother who never came back. She had been lonely, scared, and convinced that love was something she had to earn. I wanted to tell her, it's going to hurt before it heals. But one day, you'll find people who love you not because you're perfect, but because you're theirs. As the night came to a close, Ethan wrapped his arm around me, his voice soft. "Do you regret any of it? Even the hard parts?" I shook my head. "No, because it brought me here. To you. To him. To this family." I paused, feeling the cool night air on my face, and whispered, "Forgiveness didn't change my past, but it gave me a future." For the first time in so long, I believed those words. The pain hadn't vanished. The scars were still there, physical and emotional. But they were no longer chains. They were reminders of what I had survived and what I had built afterward. I wasn't that abandoned little girl anymore. I wasn't the broken woman in the wheelchair wondering if anyone would stay. I was Rachel Collins, daughter, wife, survivor, and someone who had finally learned how to stand, not just on my own 2 feet, but in my own life. As the lights dimmed and laughter echoed around me, I smiled, knowing this was only the beginning of a life I never thought I'd get to live. And for the first time, it didn't scare me to move forward, because I wasn't moving forward alone.